All right, we're back, everybody. So as we broaden our perspective from national environmental laws, we're now going to turn our attention to environmental problems that extend beyond the borders of individual countries. So this section is going to explore the unique challenges that are posed by these global concerns. We'll see the same environmental problems manifest as international externalities, meaning that the cost or the benefits of environmental actions in one country is going to affect other countries. And the key characteristics of these issues is that no single nation acting by itself alone can fully resolve these issues. For instance, one country's efforts to reduce CO2 emissions might be great, might be very beneficial for the planet, but it's not going to single-handedly solve the problem of global warming. Similarly, preserving the planet's biodiversity and the vast array of animal and plant life, well, that requires coordinated effort. And as the extinction of species in one part of the world takes place, that can have repercussions globally. So that is our focus in this section, in international issues. Our learning outcomes is to explain biodiversity and to analyze the partnership of high-income and low-income countries in their efforts to address international externalities. So let's look a little deeper at this, into the nature of these global environmental issues. Like we said in the intro, some of these problems are characterized as international externalities, where the impacts cross national boundaries and a solitary nation by itself, their actions alone are insufficient for a complete solution. Think of the example of global warming. No matter how aggressively one nation reduces its emissions of CO2 and carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, it cannot solve this problem alone without the cooperation of other significant emitters, right? That's why we have the Paris Agreement. The United States at this moment, it's April 2025. We've said we're leaving the Paris Agreement, but it exists because of all these different countries agreeing to come together and say we've got to do this as a group. Now, we're going to look at some of the problems with that here in a second. But another critical area here is this preservation of biodiversity. Biodiversity encompasses the full spectrum of animal and plant genetic material on our planet. So while a country can protect species within its own territory, the interconnectedness of these ecosystems means that the loss of biodiversity in one region can have far-reaching consequences in others. We can't tell animals that there's a border here between, United States and Canada. There's this big long line and you can't cross it. No, we can't, that doesn't make any sense. We can't keep birds from doing their migratory patterns. So that is what it is. Now, addressing these global challenges requires international cooperation, which unfortunately faces significant hurdles. Nations often have differing priorities and income levels, which complicates collaboration. For example, low-income countries may prioritize immediate economic development to meet the basic needs over environmental concerns in the short term. On the other hand, high-income countries like the United States have historically been the primary contributors to issues like greenhouse warming and through the industrial development of burning fossil fuels. And so they have a greater capacity to now invest in environmental protection because they've been the beneficiaries of all the industrialization. So you've got low-income countries who are staring at the high-income countries, the America, China, Germany, and saying, well, you went through this big pollution phase. Why can't we? We want to grow our economy. We want to take care of our people. We want to be wealthy. You did it. Why can't we do it? And so it creates this big conflict between developing nations and developed nations. And this disparity, it creates this moral dilemma, because we in the United States and we in our developed nations, we have to ask these developing nations to sacrifice or potentially sacrifice economic growth for environmental protection for all of us. And that's a hard thing to do, especially when wealthier nations are really going to bear a larger historical responsibility for that. So continuing with the challenges here of global cooperation, we also encounter the issue of these global agreements and enforcements like the Paris Accord, like I talked about. Even when international agreements on environmental issues are reached, they often lack strong enforcement mechanisms. There is no world government. There's only nation governments. There's no world government. As much as we try to cooperate, as much as we try to, form entities like the United Nations, there is simply no world government, and there likely never will be unless we colonize space and all of a sudden planet Earth is its one Earth government. Far off future kind of stuff, though, right? So this leads to situations where some countries are not going to fully adhere to their commitments, and that's going to overall undermine the overall effectiveness of the agreement. And you're going to have countries like us recently where we pulled out of the agreement of the Paris Accord. And so that is another situation where, if you can't force them, we all just have to cooperate. International climate agreements, many nations have pledged that they're going to reduce emissions, but there's no binding enforcement that can really force them to do it, and that can hinder progress. So reaching a consensus among many different sovereign nations who have diverse interests and different political systems is inherently going to be a difficult process. So given these challenges, how can we foster greater international cooperation on these kinds of environmental issues? Well, high-income nations do have a crucial role to play here because they have a responsibility to assist the low-income countries in addressing global environmental problems. This assistance can take a lot of different forms, like funding emissions reductions initiatives, providing access to advanced pollution control technologies, supporting sustainable development projects like ecotourism ventures, all these different things that we are able to do, but ultimately it comes down to our ability to collaborate. We have to be able to collaborate, and that is essential for all of us to be working together because, global warming and biodiversity and these issues, it is a global problem. We can't do it alone. Another factor that complicates this international environmental action is the inefficacy of command and control regulation on a global scale. Like I said, there's no world government. So global command and control regulation is unlikely due to the complexity and sovereignty issues involved. When I say sovereignty, I mean every nation is responsible for itself. It can't force any other nation to do what it wants unless it wants to go to war or exert, pressures in some ways. So the practicalities of establishing an international environmental regulatory body with the power to actually enforce detailed standards across numerous countries with varying legal and economic systems, that's just incredibly complex, and I don't know that that's ever going to happen. It seems improbable that something like that would ever emerge to impose such a detailed system of environmental rules. So as a result, decentralized and market-oriented approaches are probably going to offer a more practical pathway to addressing international issues like global warming and biodiversity. When I say decentralized, I mean that it's not like one world government, but rather lots of different companies are, doing their own thing, but in coordination with each other because they all share in the global economy. As that's why we're talking about a market-oriented approach. We all are participants in the global economy. So what pressure can we exert over, through that medium to make it where these things are incentivized? We want to incentivize developing nations to control their pollution. So that leads us to like I just said, the decentralized and market-oriented solutions. Governments around the world can encourage, they can incentivize private investments in areas like tourism and ecotourism and conservation that align the economic incentives with the environmental protection that we're looking for. Additionally, they can facilitate the transfer of the environmentally sound technologies like solar panels and electric vehicles and anything else like that. They can facilitate the transfer of that technology that's made in the high-income countries over to the low-income nations so that they empower them to pursue cleaner development pathways because they don't have the excuse of not having the technology. So the benefits of these kind of approaches includes greater flexibility, greater adaptability across different nations with the unique circumstances and priorities that they hold. So we can leverage these market forces. We can leverage the innovation in the private sector and the technology that we've created and that we continue to create. But we've just got to continue that effort, and we got to continue to find effective and politically feasible solutions to our shared problem of the environment. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be the challenge of our lifetime, yours and mine. So that's going to end this section. In the last section, we'll cover the trade-off between economic output and environmental protection. So a little bit more about looking at the costs and the benefits. So I'll see you in that one.